All of my assets were frozen due to a legal dispute involving the company. Lena, my adopted daughter, asked for the new villa, saying it was a gift for the new year. I told her about it and promised to make it up to her later, but she instantly changed her face and smashed the glass in her hand. Do you think I'm a fool? What kind of situation results in frozen assets? I looked at her in disappointment as she pulled out a termination of adoption agreement that she had obviously prepared beforehand. The words stuck in my throat. The company's dispute had already been resolved, and my assets would only be unfrozen in 3 days. Just say it. You're broke. I knew you couldn't be trusted, Sir Ines. You're right. My body ached from exhaustion after working with the police to settle the company's financial dispute. At the end of the driveway, a dark gray Bentley SUV sat quietly with its headlights flashing twice. I had just stepped onto the porch when Lena rushed toward me through the front door, putting her arms around me with excitement. "Mom!" She blinked up at me, smiling like a carefree child. This girl truly did once give me hope that life could still contain some tenderness. 3 years ago, I volunteered with a local youth outreach program, helping the foster care system. Now that you're back, I've missed you so much. I patted her back gently, my voice soft but laced with fatigue. It's only been a few days. Lena had just left her 3rd foster home when the agency screened families for temporary placements. Her father had been absent from her life for years due to financial difficulties, and her mother had been arrested on drug charges. Her situation was dire. No one was left to care for her, and the court had placed her in state custody. By that time, she was already exhausted by the idea of family, and the first time I saw her, she was leaning against a window in the without even looking up. She said softly, "I just want a place where I can sleep in peace," as she clutched a nearly empty sticky notepad in the corner of the classroom. I could see the quiet exhaustion and stubborn pride buried deep in her heart. This wasn't a decision I made on a whim. I filed an official application with the state, went through assessments, interviews, training, and background checks. But before she finally moved into my house, she always claimed that I would grow tired of her. However, I gradually helped her settle in, got her enrolled in school, gave her everything she needed, and even decorated her bedroom the way she liked it. Over time, our relationship started to change, and I can still clearly recall when she called me Mom after one of our family dinners. I remained silent, and then quietly cleared the return to my life. 3 years passed by. "Mom, it's cold outside." "Come on in," Lena said, holding my arm. Nevertheless, that one word stayed with me for 3 years. Eventually, I filed the formal adoption paperwork and made her a part of my family in every legal sense. She was intelligent, lively, and full of opinions. As soon as we entered the room, she took my hand and smiled, saying, "Mom, you've been so busy lately that you barely made it home last week. I was worried you wouldn't have time to get me a holiday gift, so I picked one out for you." "Well, for me, really," she said, holding up her phone to display an advertisement for an opulent lakefront villa. "I chose this one for you to give to me because it's ideal." I looked at her beaming face, but something strange stirred in my chest. Lena had always been calculating, and I knew that, but she was still young, and I'd never want to be too harsh. I kept hoping she'd grow out of it someday. My eyes then moved to the screen, which showed a recently constructed standalone villa on the banks of Cypress Creek Lake. I wouldn't have given it much thought on any other day, but the company had recently gone through a crisis, and I wasn't in the mood to take on more debt. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I asked calmly, "You already live here. Why do you need another house?" Her smile briefly froze, but she continued talking in a light-hearted and enticing tone, trying to make it sound reasonable. I turned and walked into the kitchen, slowly pouring myself a cup of coffee. In my voice, I said, "You work so hard during the day, and you need your rest at night. My friends and I want to throw parties sometimes, but I just don't want to bother you. Wouldn't it be easier if I had my own place?" I paused for a moment, holding my coffee, and then I walked back to the living room, my gaze calm and steady. It wasn't like I hadn't treated her well over the past 3 years. I had given her everything, clothes and a home. 3 floors, excellent soundproofing, and if you want to have fun, go upstairs. You won't bother me. Her smile vanished instantly, and there was a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Mom, do you have to be so frugal? It's only $2 million, which is equivalent to a few months' income for you." I had given her everything she could possibly need, including taking her to significant business events. I had done everything a mother could, but I never imagined that one day she would look me in the eye and call me stingy because I was keeping quiet. Lena suddenly lowered her head, her lips quivering and tears streaming down her cheeks. I had already promised my friends that I would take them to see the new villa tomorrow. Are you really going to make me look like this? Didn't reply. So I just took a slow sip of my coffee and said to her calmly, "If the villa means that much to you, then let me ask you something." I looked up at her, and my voice was steady and unhurried. "Did you give it away?" She froze, and her expression changed slightly, and then she muttered, "Yes." I had suspected it all along, but I hadn't confronted her because I thought maybe she would just lend them out for a while. Nothing worth a fuss. However, hearing her admit it now stirred a deep, simmering irritation that I could no longer ignore. My gaze turned colder, and my voice grew lower. "I gave that to my father and the Bentley," and she rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed. "Handle any of my property without my consent," which triggered a reaction in her that made her face flush red, her eyes water, and her emotions spiral. "It's simple for you to say that he's my biological father, but how can you call him someone else when the place you've set up for him is a dump and anyone can see he's barely making ends meet? You really believed that dilapidated house was adequate for him, so giving him the villa was the least I could do was to let him drive a luxury car because he's getting old and has never had anything nice in his life." Her voice trembled as she vented her frustration, saying, "You have so much money. Why is it so hard for you to spare just a little for us? It would change everything for us." She spoke as though she was totally justified in everything she did. In the past, perhaps her tears would have softened me. I might have patted her shoulder and whispered, "I'm sorry, I've never hurt you." But now it felt ridiculous. "You're saying that I'm meant to provide for you and your whole family, and you want me to use my money to give your father the life he's never earned?" My voice became as cold as ice. "Do you even know what he's done? He broke into private estates, and Lena's face turned pale after he stole a pile of valuables. If I hadn't stepped in and made things better, he would have been in jail by now. I didn't report him because that was already more mercy than he deserved." She bit her lip hard, and her eyes darkened with resentment. "How could you talk about my father in that way?" she snapped, raising her voice to a high pitch, and I gave up. I laughed icily, the coldness in my eyes obvious, and I saw her clearly for the first time. All the affection she claimed to have was just another transaction, and she used the title of daughter as an excuse. "I live with him because you can't show him a little kindness for my sake because he made a mistake. I'm rich, so why can't you just be generous? Leverage to demand a better life, you owe me something today," she said, becoming more agitated by the moment. "I waited for you all night, so don't think you can dismiss me with a damn cup of coffee." Her entitlement was so ridiculous that I nearly burst out laughing, and I stopped trying to hide my annoyance. I got up, went to the foyer, took the court asset freeze notice out of my bag, and went back. Lena's face froze instantly, staring at me with a flicker of unease flashing through her eyes, as if she suddenly sensed something was terribly wrong. I placed the document on the table in front of her, and with a quick glance, it looked like a bucket of ice water had been poured. "You wanted an explanation?" I said quietly, my voice like a blade, and then, "Take a good look. All of my assets have been frozen by court order. I don't want the villa anymore, okay? Just don't scare me like this." I let out a soft sigh and spoke softly, "Lena, I need you." Her voice trembled, her lips quivered, and she forced a smile, but it looked more pitiful than reassuring. "Mom, this free order isn't yours, right? You're joking, aren't you? The truth is that there has been a problem with the company, and as the attorney, all of my assets have been frozen." Her knees gave way a little as she staggered back a few steps. her face going pale in an instant. Mom said something, but I remained silent and gently rubbed my temples. Her voice now carried a shrill panic. "Don't do this. You're scaring me. Tell me this isn't permanent." I leaned back on the sofa, looked down at the document in my hands, and laughed bitterly at myself, thinking that maybe it would be over in a few months or even 10 years. She stood there in shock, her expression changing quickly, and then she suddenly stormed toward me, surprising me for a moment. She took the coffee cup from me and slammed it onto the floor, shattering the porcelain throughout the room. "Oh my God, you're really sitting here drinking coffee at a time like this?" Her voice fell to a cold growl, and her eyes were filled with disgust. "You make me sick," broke woman pretending to be high. I finally realized that even without money, she wouldn't abandon me. A faint warmth flickered in my heart. Maybe I hadn't misjudged her after all. "And mighty, I must have been blind to ever call you my mother. You have nothing now, so why am I staying here?" I sat there silently, staring at her, unable to find the right words to say. Her words tore apart what little softness I still had. So this was her warmth and dependence, and it was all just a result of money, 3 years of hard work, trust. And she said, "No money means bankruptcy." What were you thinking? "I stayed with you because I wanted a good life if you can't even keep that." I forced myself to remain calm and steady my breathing. "Lena, money can be earned again, but that doesn't mean, and how is that any different from being bankrupt?" she screamed, cutting me off, her cheeks flushed red with rage. Lena hadn't noticed the change in my expression, and she was still pacing the living room, complaining unrestrained if I'd done it. I looked at her quietly, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of my lips, and suddenly I realized that perhaps this asset freeze wasn't such a tragedy after all. At least now I finally saw the truth. I had raised an ungrateful parasite through and through. She continued to babble, even taking out a small notebook and writing down numbers as if she were formulating a financial plan. I looked at her. "If I had known you were this worthless, I would have wrung more money out of you while I had the chance. At least I wouldn't be stuck in this mess now. No way am I going down with you. Doesn't your company still have a few houses and cars under its name? Sell them, at least give me a cut." Calmly, and said, "Don't you still have quite a bit of savings? Over the past 3 years, I've given you at least $70,000. Her tone sharpened instantly. "That's my money." Her voice rose to a piercing pitch full of rage. "Florence, you're old already. If you end up on the streets, that's your problem. But I still have to take care of my father, so don't expect a single cent from me." I stared. At her, my expression unreadable. Deliberately trying to test her, I softened my voice. "If you could just lend me a little, I might be able to turn things around once I'm back on my feet." "You'd still enjoy the life you had before. Don't you want to help me?" She froze for a second before laughing sharply. "Do you think I'm stupid?" She looked at you like a miser, grabbing at straws. "And even if I gave you the money, you really think I'd ever see it again? What a joke, and you already have your assets." I gave a soft H and said nonchalantly, "Well, in that case, I'll just sell off that house and car you gave your father to. You wouldn't mind." She waved her hand as if she were throwing away a bothersome fly. "You should really be figuring out what else you can sell. Add up everything you've got left. Maybe you can scrape enough together to buy a cheap apartment. At least you'll have somewhere to crash." "Dare," she said it out of pure reflex, but as soon as she realized her mistake, she tried to hide it with a forced cough. "I mean, sell the stuff that no one is using. There's no use in letting it all sit around collecting dust." I didn't answer. I just stared at her in silence. I could see her true intentions clearly now, and he was okay with sharing the wealth, but never the hardship. She was ready to walk away the moment she realized I couldn't continue to provide her with that comfortable lifestyle. I'd make things easy for her. Oh, I almost forgot to say I'd set down my coffee cup slowly and deliberately. After the asset freeze, those houses were also frozen, so it looks like you'll be moving into a regular apartment with me. Of course. It was a lie, just a test to see how she would react, and she didn't even. My dad was right. Women like you were always going to burn through everything eventually. He warned me not to put too much trust in you, but I guess he saw through you better than I did. Fortunately, I was prepared. She took a printed document out of the drawer and threw it in front of me, signing it because we've been living together for 3 years. I'm being generous once you. She lifted her chin and looked down at me as if she had already won. If I'm feeling good, I might send you some money every month, but don't get your hopes up. I'm not here to report you. I stared at the termination of adoption agreement statement for a moment before quietly laughing. So that was it. She had planned this all along to sign my father, and I will file the petition with the court. She saw my hesitation and scowled, saying, "Hurry up! My dad is waiting for me to come home for dinner." I raised my head and spoke calmly. "Didn't you say you had a party with your friends tonight?" Her eyes were full of scorn. "I was never a mother, just an ATM on legs," she said, canceling her subscription now that the balance was 0. She simply laughed carelessly and unbothered about getting rid of a burden like you, and I couldn't be happier as she turned to leave. Her eyes fell on a gold-framed photo on the coffee table, and she quickly grabbed it. That last sentence stripped away all pretense, so I didn't hesitate any longer. I picked up the pen and signed my name. "I hope you don't regret this," I said flatly. I didn't stop her. I just watched her go, knowing that after taking everything she thought might be valuable, she would never be worthy of touching it again 3 days later, right after sunrise. She then went around the room, gathering everything she thought might be valuable, and stuffed it all into her bag at the door. One last time, she looked back, remembering that we were filing the paperwork the day after tomorrow. I said coolly, "I gave you my word, didn't I? And I'm not going to back out less than 5 minutes later." But before I could leave the house, my phone rang and Lena's name flashed across the screen. "Hello? What are you doing?" "I've been waiting outside the courthouse for almost an hour. Are you on your way yet?" "Don't panic." I took my time, washed up slowly, changed into new clothes, dried my hair strand by strand, and then I got in the car and drove to the courthouse from a distance. She thought she could take everything from me and leave without any repercussions, so I was intrigued to see how desperate she was to cut ties. I laughed softly, with a hint of irony in my eyes. When I got out of the car, I saw Lena pacing impatiently at the entrance with her long-lost biological father, Rick Dawson, following her. Rick's eyes were fixed on me. Instead of the growling position he had previously adopted, he now stared, openly and boldly, with a smug expression and a hint of provocation in his gaze. I stayed composed and said evenly, "If you're so eager to lose those eyes, I'd be happy to help." But he flinched just a little. For a brief moment, his arrogance wavered, and he muttered, "Florence Dawson, you're still putting on airs. What, makes you think you're in any position to talk tough?" I smiled a little. My eyes were as sharp as glass, and I looked at him. "Are you sure about that, even with the company's troubles?" Rick didn't respond, but I noticed how his feet automatically shuffled half. I took a step back and grinned icily to myself. Lena, sensing our tension, moved forward and blocked his path, frowning. "Let's get this over with," she said, "because I have plans after this shopping with friends." I didn't answer. Instead, I pushed open the door and entered calmly and unconcerned. Behind me, I heard her mutter something like, "Pathetic old bleach." The court was still processing the formal dissolution, but my lawyer assured me there would be no complications. I paused for a brief moment, but I didn't turn around. 2 hours later, the hearing ended, and I stepped outside. I stopped at the courthouse step and turned to Lena, my tone icy. "What was it you said to me earlier?" She blinked. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight in my chest lessen for the first time in weeks. She was taken aback by the question, and her face was still, partially formed when I leaned in close. My voice was steady and low, but every word hit like ice. Lena, you can betray loyalty and end relationships, but don't you ever think you have the right to make fun of me. She automatically stepped back, a look of discomfort appearing on her face. I straightened up and gave a faint, I smiled distantly, and turned to leave. Lena read with fury. She took a step forward to follow me, but two security guards I had prearranged swiftly blocked her path. One of them said politely, "Miss Dawson, your car is waiting this way." I took steady steps toward the car, but as I got to the door, I stopped and gave them one last look. A slow, meaningful smile tugged at my lips, and I almost forgot what I had said. Casually, by assets, they were completely unfrozen this morning. As soon as I finished speaking, silence descended upon us like a curtain, followed by a scathing laugh. "You truly are something, aren't you?" Lena sneered. "Still putting on a show to defend your pitiful pride, but stop acting like you're above everything. It only makes you look even more ridiculous." Then, right on cue, a brand new red Ferrari rolled smoothly into the parking lot. Its polished body gleamed under the morning sun, radiating brilliance. The door opened, and my assistant stepped out. He was immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, and his every movement was precise and refined. He walked over with an easy smile and spoke in a warm, clear voice. "Miss Dawson." He paused for a moment before adding, "The company's operations have fully resumed after the temporary levy arranged for all departments. I just picked up the car you ordered 2 days ago from the showroom. Would you like to issue any additional directives?" His voice wasn't loud, but every word hit like a hammer, landing squarely in Lena and Rick's ears. Rick may not have fully grasped the situation yet, but Lena understood exactly what that car meant. It was a limited edition Ferrari that I had never owned before, and it had just been delivered personally by my assistant. This wasn't a performance. This was reality, and this couldn't be happening, she screamed. They froze in place, stunned, as if rooted to the ground, unable to process what they were seeing. The edge of hysteria, her gaze fixed on the car as she staggered back in shock. "You did this on purpose just to humiliate me, didn't you? You wanted to make me look pathetic, right, you heartless?" I continued to smile as I watched her unravel, and the assistant frowned slightly, obviously offended, but I gently stopped him because there was no more need to argue. The truth spoke for itself. Rick stood there. Pale and stunned, perspiration started to trickle down his brow, and then he realized, like a freight train, that if Lena hadn't been yelling that I was bankrupt, he would never have dared to act so arrogant. However, if I hadn't been bankrupt at all, he would have played the fool, Miss Dawson, and he stumbled as he stepped forward cautiously, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "So you, Orko, has always been the acting head of the company." The so-called bankruptcy was nothing more than a misinterpretation of a temporary asset freeze brought on by malicious interference from a former employee. I gave him a sidelong glance and said nothing. Since then, everything has returned to normal. He took a business card out of his pocket and held it out to Rick, saying, "If you still have concerns, you're welcome to visit the company in person." Rick's hand trembled as he took the card, barely holding it steady, his face gray, his eyes glassy with embarrassment. No matter how hard he tried to deny it, the truth was undeniable. Now I wasn't ruined. I was stronger than ever, you idiot. Before Lena could react, Rick was already hurling a barrage of profanities in front of everyone without the slightest self-control. Lena opened her mouth to defend herself, but nothing came out as her face turned red and her eyes turned scarlet. "You said that Lena was broke and that she had nothing left. You brought me here to humiliate her." Lena sobbed so hard that it shook her whole body, clutching my leg as if it were her last lifeline. "Mom, I was wrong. I swear I just let the money get to my head. You can hit me, yell at me, or anything. Just take me back. As long as you let me be your daughter again, I'll do whatever you want," she said, her voice choked with tears and snot, smearing across her face. Her makeup was a complete mess, but I stood there silently, completely unmoved, because I knew that this wasn't regret, but fear. She didn't want to return to me. She just didn't want to return to poverty. This wasn't love. It was calculation. I spoke slowly, calmly, and unwaveringly, "Lena," and she looked up in shock, stunned by the finality of what I had said. My assistant immediately understood Miss Dawson's situation and said, "I'll have everything processed by this afternoon." I then proceeded to freeze all of her credit cards and cancel her access to all trust accounts, terminate any financial benefits she was receiving, and remove her from all company systems. Lena frantically sprang to her feet, reaching out to grab me, but I retreated to avoid her touch. "You made your decision, Lena. You signed the termination of adoption agreement. You gave up this relationship with your own hands, and you wanted freedom. Remove access to any homes and cars under my name, and no more internal assistance of any kind. Now that you have it," her lips trembled, but she was unable to find the right words to say. She wasn't foolish, though, because she quickly realized that she couldn't undo this. He stopped crying and pleading, and her face turned hard and cold. "You think that this means you've won?" She spat through gritted teeth, her voice thick with venom. "You regret this one day you think your Rick had been standing quietly close by." But now his brow started to furrow and he shifted uneasily. "Money makes you untouchable, and you're just an old woman with no one who truly loves you." I stared, at her unaffected, and her insults kept coming, each one more scathing than the last, as if she was trying to numb her own humiliation and rage. "You used me from the start." Clearly uncomfortable, Lena turned around and tried to yank him back, to her side. "Dad, you see it now, don't you?" she said. "She never really cared about either of us. We were just accessories to her perfect image. The moment we became a nuisance, she threw us out." Rick narrowed his eyes and spoke in a low, guarded voice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, we're the real family." Rick's eyes flickered as Lena spoke, clearly stoking a long-held resentment. "If she's really that heartless, she would have kicked us out a long time ago," he said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Didn't you always say that she looked down on us? That she only kept us around for appearances? She's just using us to entertain herself. We're nothing but a game to her." I was trying as hard as anyone else to convince himself that perhaps she was just being polite because of the past. Lena had jumped on the momentum, so she wasn't being polite. Instead, she was just waiting for the right opportunity to destroy us. "If you don't stand with me now, she'll come after you next." Rick faltered, his expression changing from doubt to defensiveness and back again. I watched the entire scene play out with calm indifference. "What is this?" I said quietly. I tilted my head slightly as my eyes swept between them during a brief father-daughter performance. "You sold out a mother's love for a taste of luxury and pawned off your daughter to a wealthy woman for comfort. What a pair you make." Rick's face flushed red with rage. "Don't push it, Florence. Just because you're wealthy doesn't mean you can walk all over people like you are always played in the end." I raised an eyebrow and spoke steadily, but glacial. "Money is just a tool, and you two aren't even worthy of being one." Lena's face twisted as she snarled, "Fine, you think you've won. Just wait, I'll crush you one day." I turned to my assistant without turning around. I added both of them to the company's security blacklist, which bans them from all buildings and affiliated properties. I also said, "Let the law collect everything they owe me." My assistant nodded. "I'll have legal counsel initiate the recovery. Process immediately." I turned away and walked toward the car, taking small, steady steps as I went. Lena was still screaming and Rick was swearing, but I didn't hear a word when I pulled into my new car's driveway. The teapot on the table was still steaming gently, and I had just sat down, barely raising the cup to my lips, when the doorbell rang and I opened the door. The scene in front of me almost made me laugh. Rick Dawson was standing at the threshold, clearly tense. Lena flinched and instantly fell to her knees when he saw me. Her eyes were filled with panic, and her voice was shaking as she muttered, "Miss Dawson, I was wrong." Rick wrung his hands nervously, trying to sound apologetic. But Miss Dawson is young and stupid, and I've already given her Lena's voice. Was teary. Her face was streaked with tears. Her hair was disheveled, and her skin was marked with faint red welts and scratches. She kept her head down like a prisoner awaiting judgment, her entire body trembling. I looked down at her, unmoved, and wondered what all the time and effort I had put into her had brought me. When Rick noticed my silence, he became more nervous, and his mouth twitched as his eyes darted nervously between Lena and me. Then, light laughter and chattering voices came from outside. "Is Lena here?" "We're going to the club together." Too chic. Young women stood at the entrance observing me with polite disinterest. They hadn't noticed the disheveled appearance. Figure kneeling on the ground, but as Lena automatically turned her head to face the voices, the girls saw her and froze in place. Their eyes widened and their expressions changed in an instant. One of them asked, "What the hell are you doing?" Lena's face was devoid of color, and she scurried to her feet in a panic, fumbling for an explanation. I can explain, but it's not what it looks like. I turned to the two girls with a calm, collected expression and gently raised my hand to stop her from saying anything more. She had already seen through the mask she wore so well, and what she valued most had never been love, but rather appearances, image, and pride. And now this was the humiliation she could never bear. "Lena was once my adopted daughter," I said with a gentle smile a few days ago, and she assumed my company had gone. Lena swayed slightly as if my words had knocked the breath out of her lungs. The color drained from her face completely. The two girls exchanged a glance and then smirked with mocking amusement, and I knew it was a setup. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and added almost playfully, but unfortunately for her, that was all part of a setup. And now someone is regretting it. The other girl snapped with a chilly smile. "You really thought a couple of handbags would buy friendship? Grow up, Lena, with that." She always boasted about how much pocket money she had, acting like some self-important ass. What a joke. Lena's eyes widened in disbelief. "How can you say that I gave you gifts and bought designer bags for you? You think we cared?" Lena stood motionless for another word, not even a farewell, as though someone had dropped her into a block of ice. Her lips trembled, but she held them together to avoid falling apart. "I know I was mistaken," she said, her voice choking, her arrogance gone. "You loved me so much once. Don't I deserve a second chance?" I lowered my eyes and looked at her. I wanted to see if she finally realized what she had lost, but I saw no remorse in her eyes, only helplessness and fear. She wasn't sorry, but she was afraid of reverting to the life she believed she had left behind. So I spoke quietly, but firmly. "Lena, the most extravagant thing in the world isn't a fancy car or a designer bag. It's a person's heart, and you've already spent this much money." Rick stayed trying to talk sense into my head one last time. But when he saw how determined I was, he muttered a curse under his breath and followed her. I stood there watching them leave my life, 3 years of memories dispersed, hollow and gone. Her face fell completely, and she knew that this time it was really over. A heart doesn't rot overnight, and I knew deep down that she wouldn't have worn that mask so convincingly if I hadn't stood at the top. I closed my eyes for a moment and let out a slow breath, wondering what really happened. It wasn't that I was heartless. I had once loved her deeply and tried to raise her into a strong and decent woman. She had once served me tea in the kitchen and once made a clumsy but sincere attempt to throw me a surprise birthday dinner. I stepped back inside. The tea had gone cold. The breeze danced softly with the curtains. I brewed another pot, and I walked out onto the balcony to watch the sun slowly sink behind the horizon. It wasn't whether she repented, but the fact that I finally realized there was no longer a need to hold on to right or wrong to justify our bond. When the elevator doors opened the following morning, the world felt peacefully quiet for the first time in a long time. The receptionist was almost bursting with excitement, welcoming me with a bright, almost trembling voice. "Miss Dawson, welcome back." I walked through the office floor, and every employee I passed nodded respectfully, some even wiping the corners of their eyes with a mixture of relief and admiration that I had not yet realized how deeply ingrained my presence was here and how much it meant to everyone. My assistant escorted me into the office and began a briefing on the new quarters, market strategies, and ongoing projects. I listened intently, taking my time so that each department's voice could be heard, gradually regaining the rhythm of leadership. I was sitting at my desk going through an old set of files when there was a gentle knock on the door. "Miss Dawson," my assistant said softly, "this just came in. It's a courier delivery. The sender is Lena." I paused for a moment, discovering a deep blue document envelope sealed with a gold-edged label. Clarity and calmness had returned by the afternoon, as golden sunlight filtered into the office. I opened the envelope to find a few sheets of legal documents and a neatly folded handwritten letter, just like the one she used to love. Her handwriting was familiar, but it was devoid of the typical flamboyance and flair. "Florence, I know I no longer have the right to call you Mom, but please let me write this letter. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to offer some sincerity, no matter how late it is, to help make sense of this relationship that went out of control." I leaned back in my chair and read every line, the sincerity in her raw words settling in quietly. Recently, I found myself back in my dad's apartment, which I thought I had left behind. It's old, damp, and it took me more than an hour for the hot water to turn on before I realized how different the life you gave me was from everything I had known before. However, I regret more than just the hardship and the comfort I missed. I regret that when I stripped myself of the title of being your daughter, I also tore apart every aspect of my life for which I should be thankful and honored. It took me a whole week to find the courage to write this, and if I were, I'm voluntarily returning everything you once gave me because I don't deserve to keep any part of your world. But I do hope that even if I'm not a daughter, at least as someone you once showed kindness to, I can give myself a chance to start over. By the time I finished the last sentence, my fingertips were a little cold. I'm not someone who softens easily, but in an attempt to win you over, I wouldn't have included the legal documents enclosed. I knew she might still be immature and not fully comprehend the consequences of her actions, but she had finally started to face herself, and that was the beginning of growth. I didn't write back. Instead, I put the letter gently aside. Later that night, I gave my assistant instructions to make a covert donation anonymously to support Lena's enrollment in AA. Friend took me to a community charity dinner a few days later, and the venue was warm and elegant, with the gentle hum of old-school jazz drifting through the air. For a moment, I forgot. The vocational retraining program focused on market analysis, the very field she had briefly touched during her time at the company. I didn't intend to tell her where the funding came from. I didn't need her gratitude, and I just hoped she wouldn't waste her second chance. I was standing with a glass of champagne, chatting with a woman nearby. A quiet, low voice said, "Florence Dawson," and I recognized your name. I turned to see a man standing next to me, modestly dressed, his presence grounded yet respectful, and his eyes containing the perfect amount of curiosity and respect. "I'm Samuel Pierce." He introduced himself and said, "I run the Community Health Fund." I heard that you've been changing the direction of your business lately, so I smiled a little, thinking that I've become somewhat of a headline in some circles. He laughed in a sincere tone, and I thought, "You sound like someone worth listening to." At that moment, I realized that there is a kind of gentleness that comes from being treated as an equal and being treated with respect rather than from power negotiations or strategies. The company's crisis had passed, and I had been the one to turn it around with a renewed vision. I revived a long-delayed interstate market integration project, and everything went back to normal faster than I had anticipated. I had thought that losing certain people would leave a permanent void, but life doesn't stop for heartbreak. It quietly stitches itself back together in the spaces left behind. Every morning I stood at the head of the conference room, rebuilding the company's core business framework and dissecting strategic blueprints with clarity and precision. My coworkers no longer viewed me as just the company's leader, but rather as an anchor and a symbol of purpose. Now that Miss Dawson is back, someone whispered, "Once we've got direction again." And I heard it and grinned. On sunlit afternoons, I would brew oolong tea, sit in the wicker chair, and watch the breeze flutter through the flowers. Neighbors would stop by to say hello, and for the first time, I no longer felt as though I was watching life through glass. I started to rebuild the parts of my life that I had long neglected outside of work. I planted the first sprig of lavender in the garden, Lena's favorite scent, something I'd neglected when I was younger, and turned the storage room upstairs into a studio. The work wasn't very good, but it made me feel at ease, and I even started organizing a long-overdue vacation, perhaps to see the snow. Perhaps listening to the wind along San Francisco's shoreline in the Colorado Rockies isn't an escape, but a genuine. This time, the absence was intentional rather than avoidant. Occasionally, Samuel would join me for dinner. We didn't have a romantic relationship. He was just a nice, considerate man with whom I spoke. You appear more stable than most when it comes to books, markets, family histories, and sometimes the more subdued sorrows of our past. I laughed softly one evening when he stated, "People I know, it's not steadiness, it's there was no need to push a bond." I was learning to let go of the need to clutch so fiercely, and I realized that not all companies had to be referred to as love in order to be incredibly consoling. Thus, I never reached out to Lena. Her once more, but according to a community project organizer, she was assiduously attending her classes. Her perfect attendance record and her willingness to volunteer for the mentorship program led me to believe that perhaps she was beginning to realize that genuine redemption occurs when you decide to do so, not when someone else gives you another chance. Be strong for yourself. I didn't meddle in her new life, just as I hoped that nobody would meddle in mine outside of I flipped a page in the book I'd been reading carefully as moonlight flooded across my desk, allowing the paper's gentle smoothness is traced by fingers. This year I lost a lot and gained even more, and I ultimately realized that happiness comes from letting go of worries about the future, not from having more or someone. Be lost, since you'll discover that you already have all you need once you have the guts to do it alone. There is still a lot I don't know about the future, but I do know that I am soft and strong enough to face every as it arrives tomorrow.